SFB Addict here. It's time to do an update video. The last update video was for number 19 of the module. Since then we've had update 20, 21, 22, 23, and I'm working on 24. So I'm just going to quickly as I can go through each of those changes that have been made since then. One of the things that changed was in the selection of the maps. I removed most of the labels that didn't have a hex sizing. Although there is at least one still there for Starfield map. That's simply because it was tied to too many of the existing scenarios. But anyway, let's see. Let me scroll down here to update 20, and we'll kind of work our way up from the bottom. Okay, I rearranged the menus, and I rearranged them again. So they're now rules, player selection, SSD, area selection, counters, pieces, drag and drop, your speed callers, thinking, no action, SOP steps, SOP orders, dice, ready, units off map, and then your map tools, and then your clear fire and clear movement. Okay, so I'm going to start with update 20. I rewrote scenario 11 with some addenda rules that were not in the Cadet module. That made it harder as it was a little bit too easy. I added a couple more drones, so all drone speeds now have two kinds to make use of labs for IDing seeking weapons. So let me pull up some drag and drop charts for weapons, seeking weapons. These are the drones. So as you can see, I've organized it by speed, and there's two types at each speed. And basically the explosion strength varies and or the number of hit points varies at each speed. And when we get up to speed 10, the C6 drone is a phaser 3 or an ADD. And that is for shooting at fighters kind of thing. And let me just make a quick note here that I need to add an ADD table to the game because I forgot to do that. So those are the various types of drones. The fire tracking sheets, on a few of the terrain pieces I added the ability to clone those pieces. They weren't there before, so for instance, if I go into civilian and I look at fire orders, weapons, there we go. So these now have the ability to clone, and they have the ability to label, and you can use them either as a show table or you can use them as a property sheet. And the property sheets basically is just a text window you can type in. And as you notice, the property sheets stay on top, whereas the show data ones, if you click on the map, they go to the background. So it's a bit annoying kind of thing to have that happen. So that's why you have two options. Added a Facebook group link in the help menu. Cleaned up the full-scale SSDs from their original blurry JPEG images. So those got a little bit easier to see from their original JPEG. So there's the original JPEG, and there's the cleaned up version. So it's a little less blurry. So if I go back to my list here, the number of boarding parties carried by a Q ship wasn't listed, so I added that to the pirate raid scenario. And in the 24th update, I'll also be adding the number of boarding parties there are for a large freighter and a large Q ship. Let's see. I found a new way to do rules checklists with an HTML button and page, which I then abandoned later on, and have now done them as a graphic that you can drag and drop into an SSD area. So if I become a side, doesn't matter what side, usually one that's not currently being used in a game, You can then go in and open up that race's SSD area window, and then you can go into drag and drop and then go into rules checklists. And there are rules checklists for general rules, weapons, shuttles, lock-on, movement. And you can drag each one of those into the SSD area window. And then you can check mark what rules you are or are not using. And you can refer to them throughout the game by just opening up that particular player's side's SSD area window. You don't have to be a member of that side to look at what's in the SSD area window. You just can't modify anything. So once you've loaded all your charts, you can close it and then become the player side that's actually being used for whatever game you're playing. And you can always go back in and just open back up and refer to what's there as a reminder. Okay, updated the rules by scenario page to put a brief description of the scenario to the right of what rules are learned. So that is here in rules and scenario. If we go to the first one here, it lists scenario 1, 2, and 3 and what is learned. So a quick description of what the scenario is, the Dakota incident, and in scenario 4 you learn MG allocation and arming costs, etc. Fixed a couple typos in the scenarios, removed the old maps with no size descriptor, already said that. Added a new map background. I may do that from time to time as I do an update. Created multi-access ship counters for single play. So, all the races, like Klingon, Federation, etc., only the player that is on that side can access those counters. Now, in the first couple of scenarios, scenario 1, 2, and 3, it doesn't really tell you to become a side. So what I did is I created multi-access counters, which are not restricted to players, that are used in those first few scenarios. And they got a bunch of images on them. Speed call charts had a label trait added, so turn could be assigned as a label. So those are the speed charts here. Oops, sorry, wrong one. I want the graphic one. So right here you can put a turn label on them, and it's there for all of the charts, 8, 16, and 32. Added a multi-race masked counter, and that is this one. Some people may be using the maps to do campaign games, and they can use these sort of counters for sensor contacts, that sort of thing. I rearranged the menus a bit, so they're not in the same order they were. I fixed a couple typos on some of the images. I added more drag and drop charts. Let's see. I remember what I added here. Probably the repair. Maybe the transporter ones. But anyway, a few more of those have been added. So in rules, under tables, you've got a bunch of charts here. And not all of these, for instance, this abbreviation and index one, are not in the drag and drops. But I added a few more of the other ones. Like the cost repair one is now a drag and drop. Remade all of the scenario files with new counters. Only the tutorial still uses some old counters. Actually, that's not true. In Update 24, I've redone the tutorial. Let's see, I rewrote the Pirate Q-Ship Scenario 12. I reworked the masking function. And that's actually been dropped quite a bit for quite a lot of pieces because it wasn't working the way it should have been. Restricting access and then having some features be able to be hidden, masked, and later unhidden, unmasked, was very useful to have, but it just wasn't working properly because of the way traits for counters get constructed in Vassal. as I was testing each individual trait, those were working, but I forgot to go back and check the previous traits, which I had already tested in the previous updates, and it just didn't work properly the way it was supposed to. And let's see. I removed show data on some items in favor of a property sheet, as those are always on top, which I already mentioned. And as a consequence of removing masking, I was able to collapse some of the multiple drone, plasma, and shuttle counters all into one counter. So, under Federation, for instance, there used to be a bunch of different items. Now up here, they're available as one item, and you can just rotate through the images. So you get from shuttles to fighters, and then drones, and then eventually plasmas, and back to shuttles, so you just keep rotating through. And that was update 20. And let's see, we are at the 11-minute mark, and I've only done one update. This is probably going to be about a 15-minute video by the time I'm done, I think. Update 21. Minor change to the EW, increased it to 12. It was limited to 6 before. So we go in here, we go to Electronic Warfare, and turn it on. These numbers used to only go to 6, now they go up to 12. And 0 is there as level 13, because the levels are labeled and the levels and the images weren't matching, so level 0 was actually, well, there isn't a level 0, it's level 1's the first level, and it was image 0 for 0 ECM, so I've put 0 as 13. Minor change to fired, that is, let's see, let's turn off EW. In a multi-ship game, if one ship is completely emptied of weapons, it's useful to mark it as having been fired. Previously, this wasn't working properly for multiple counters. It was if one ship was fired and another ship wasn't fired, and I click the clear fire button up here in the top right, it was just simply reversing the order of the counters, and now it's now properly functioning where it is actually turning it off for everything instead of just inverting it. Train pieces had an ECM trait, but you couldn't actually set it because it was labeled improperly. It was labeled as ECM instead of EW status, so that's now been fixed. And that's what I just showed you here with this menu. Turning it on and off now functions. I added an unofficial random damage die roller, but it does not follow the rules. It is completely random. So your first roll of damage on a random could be an excess damage, or it could be 5 weapon hits in a row kind of thing. So it's not that great, but I was experimenting with something, and I left it in just in case you choose to experiment with it. Let's see, I found a more appealing way to do text SSDs directly on the counter. The old way of doing them is still there. So if you go into Federation kind of thing, go down to the, oops, sorry, that's under here. Go under Federation and go down to the bottom. There is a old text SSD method. Now this is a little bit slower to set up because you have to right click and go to each menu option to fill in each and every item. And if you move the item, it actually would echo all of these in the chat. And some people unfortunately have a tendency to move the graphic every time they click on it kind of thing. So that's the old way of doing it, but now we have a new way of doing it, and it is the MultiAccess text SSD. And there is also an energy allocation form. So this gets dragged onto the map, and because it's on the map, I can't have a right click and do the energy allocation form because everybody's able to access it. So you have an energy allocation form that you can drag into your player SSD area window so it's locked down. But anyway, it's got the erratic maneuvering status, passive fire control status, and no fire control status here underneath the counter, as well as ECM and ECCM. And you can turn all of them off except for the ECM and ECCM. It functions a little differently than the other counters for EW. Here the EW is turned on and off, and you can change the numbers, whereas here you would right click, go to EW status, and just change the level with the number directly. So this one here can go to higher levels than just 12. So if I wanted to do 555, let's see how many, if I want to do 55 ECM, I can do that. I guess I restricted it to 2 characters. It's kind of impossible to get up that high anyway, but you can do more than 12 ECM on these ones, and these ones are limited to 12. And remove the old text SSD sheets to reduce file size, but left it in for merchant, fed, and clink. And I can't remember if I reversed my mind on that. Let's see. Is there? Let's see. No, I might have left it in for Romulan. Let's see. Paladin. Yeah, I reversed my decision on that later on and put them all back in. It didn't actually reduce file size all that much. Let's see. Found a crude way to enter a number of dice to roll at a range for a weapon. So if you go in through here and go in through here, you can actually do a phaser 1, range 16 to 25 shot. And it'll actually add up the total for you. But it doesn't let you see what the individual rolls are, so some people don't like using it. Added previous image option. So it used to be that there was only an option in here for next image, and I've added a previous image option because some of these lists of graphics got quite extensive. So having the ability to go back 1 or 2 was needed. And that is everything for update 21. Okay, now for update 22, I fixed scenario 3. I forgot to give up position as Klingon, and that prevented other people from taking position as Klingon. I moved the multi-access counters to the top of the menu, so all the races are now down below, and the multi-access ones are at the top. Simply because new players, when they come in here, are going to want to play with pulling things onto the map. So the multi-access ones are at the top. Let's see. Sorry, I just had to move my cable from my headset because it was making noise as I was moving my head. Added a few more moon planet graphics. So if I go into terrain, there's a few more of the moons available. And the same thing with planets. There's now a whole bunch of new planets available in different sizes. Multi-access text. I keep saying test. Multi-access text SSDs uses a property sheet instead of show data. So that is this one, and it's now this. So always make the window smaller so you get your drag bar here on the right. But anyway, so that's here as a property sheet now. So it uses this instead of the old show data one, which I removed. It just wasn't doing it as well. And under tables, the suicide shuttles. This was broken, and it was pulling up an HTML file instead of a proper PNG file, so I fixed that. Added a few more drag and drop charts, one of which is the firing arcs. So if I go into here and firing arcs, you can drag the firing arcs onto the map, and you can right click and rotate them to try and get a better understanding of the firing arcs. And we're up to 20 minutes. Let's see. Remove the old rules checklist methods. Can't even talk straight. And we're now at the current one, which I already showed you. Then I added a bunch of SSDs, and I changed the turn modes on some ships simply because I had forgot to change them when I had originally made the SSDs. That was update 23. The SSDs that were created and added there were Hydron, BCH, ISC Light Cruiser, and DD, Romulan Light Cruiser, and 2 Romulan Dreadnoughts. So we're up to update 23. Broken shuttle damage on the ROM Dreadnought was fixed. It was jumping from 1 damage to 3 damage. It was missing 2. And then I had to go back in update 24 and do the same thing for the Klingon Dreadnought. Let's see, I added a Romulan Dreadnought for new construction and old series. Added a Cadet BCH for Federation, Gorn, Zinti, Klingon, and Romulan. Added a menu option for previous image to a bunch of counters, in addition to what I had done previously. Added a 100% units on map window. So that is this. So it shows the items here as full size, whereas the other one, whoops, that one, showed them at a reduced percentage. And this is particularly helpful for when we use the graphic impulse charts, because if the map is zoomed down, the numbers get harder to see on this, but not while they are still in the 100% window. Let me refresh that. So on the 50% one, it's half the size, but in the 100% one, it's still full size. And then I went in and I modified each of the movement charts so I can now right-click, set the impulse and the speeds and the label directly in these units on map windows. I removed the energy allocation form from the MultiAccess text counter. That's that one, and that was in favor of the drag and drop one. Which you can put in your player SSD area. Added ESG shading option for the MultiAccess counter. So even though it's a Fed counter, it's got the Lyran ESG kind of thing. The old way of doing ESGs is still there. And I added light support, active fire control, and power lines for shielding to the energy allocation form from MultiAccess, because they are used for the full-scale SSDs, and those lines are needed for that, which now brings us to update 24. I added some more ships, an alternate Gorn and ROM, and added an ISC BCH, added a civilian large freighter, large Q ship, fixed a minor error on a Hydron BCH, added a Hydron Dreadnought and a Hydron alternate Dreadnought for a heavy DN, fixed a few typos, Scenario 4, fixed minor mistakes on the Orion and Klingon D6 full-scale EA forms, and on a couple of the Cadet ones. Fixed an error on the text 32 chart for impulses 14 and 21, and that is these ones here. So these get echoed to chat directly as you go through the impulses. And on impulse 14 and 21 I had messed up in the back half. Instead of having impulse 14 it had impulse 13, and instead of impulse 21 it had impulse 20. So those had to be fixed. And the one of these for the 8 impulse game was completely removed because it never got used. And I also labeled them as echoes to chat or as graphic. That way you can know that the graphic ones are actually graphic that are on the map. And I also alphabetized and reordered some of the buttons. So, for instance, in under tables, it's D, N, R, T, S, W, so they're in alphabetical order. And I moved the ready button from over here to way over here. And the public-private notes is now SOP orders, because that's exactly what you're issuing when you click that button. You click it, and then under the delayed tab, you're issuing your orders, which are the SOP steps. So if you're launching a plasma, the SOP step of launching plasmas, you would write in the launch order. So that's what it is. It's a SOP step, and it's a SOP order for those steps. And it flows a little bit better because if you, as you're proceeding through the impulses, you are either going to have no action, or you're going to stop and think, or you are going to issue an order, and then whatever stage that was, and then you actually issue the order, and then you would roll the dice if you needed to roll dice, and then if there's a button here for ready. I could have completely removed the ready button, but some people may find it useful to still have it, so I left it. I updated the rules by rules number to include some sections that were in the second printing of the Cadet manual, but not in the first printing, and when I built the module I used the first printing. And I fixed a broken shuttle damage on the Dreadnought. I think I mentioned that already. It was the same mistake that was on the Romulan one. I deleted the no action shit that was under generic pieces, simply because I could not see a use for it anymore. And in rules by rule number, the section for F2.2 was in the wrong section. I had to end up moving that. I think it was down in D section somewhere, not or it should have been. And coming up, there will also be boarding party charts added for the large freighter and Q ships. And I will add, hopefully, a Control-L, Control-R for rotation of the firing arcs ones. So we're at 27 minutes, so that's better than 46 minutes. But anyway, the only thing left here really to show you would be the actual SSDs that were added. So this is pretty much the end of the video, unless you want to see what the actual SSDs that were added were. So I think under Federation we had added the BCH. Frax hasn't had anything added. Gorn has had the BCH added, and here it has an S-Torp, 4 phaser 3s, 4 phaser 1s. It's got an alternate one, which is a G-Torp and 2 Fs, and it's got 2 phaser 3s and 4 phaser 1s. And then we went to Hydron. They got a heavy dreadnought, they got a light dreadnought, and the fighters on the dreadnoughts have fusion beams, which the other fighters do not have, and they have an increased speed of speed 10. So if you were to compare these to the 32 impulse game, that means these fighters would actually be about a speed 20 fighter. And then we had a Cadet BCH added, and these fighters do not have the fusion beams. And under ISC, we took the CA and we dropped the PPD and changed the phaser. So this one has 2 phaser 3s, 1 phaser 1, and a PPD and a Plasma F. And by going down to a light cruiser, it loses the PPD, gains the phaser 3. These 2 phaser 3s get upgraded to phaser 1s. So this one's got 3 phaser 1s and 1 phaser 3. The DD becomes 3 phaser 3s, 1 phaser 1. And then we went the opposite direction, and the BCH, it keeps the PPD, it upgrades the phaser 3s to phaser 1s, and the Plasma gets upgraded to a G-Torp. So that was ISC. Klingon, the only thing added here was a BCH, because it already had a big number of SSDs. Zinti, we added a BCH, 2 disruptors, 2 phaser 1s, 4 drones, 4 phaser 3s. I think this one got an extra shuttle. Lyran didn't get any added, LDR didn't, Orion didn't, Paladin didn't. Seltorian, Tholian, and Wynn didn't, so the last race that had SSDs added was the Romulan. So we ended up getting the Romulan new series Dreadnought. It's vaguely similar to a Klingon design, but not really. The Klingon BCH, Klingon Dreadnought, old series Dreadnought, and I just realized I still have that labeled as Cadet Cruiser. It's actually a Dreadnought, and I've got to update this to Dreadnought. Like I said, still working on this update. Okay, so that's the Dreadnought, and then we got a BCH built on the new series. These ones kind of look like the Daredecks and TNG, kinda, but not quite, kind of thing. If you actually see them in multi-dimension, and the old series BCH, Klingon series BCH. And I believe that was it for all the SSDs that we added. So that's all the changes from update 19 up to update 24. Have fun playing SFB.